This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and today I have a very special interview with a guest I'm honored to be speaking with. He is the former head investigator for the British Ministry of Defense related to UFOs. He's also an author, and he's one of the stars of The Basement Office, which is a great YouTube program that the New York Post puts out. Nick Pope, how are you doing today, sir?
Yes, very well, thank you. Good to be on the show.
Great to have you. And to start this off, do you want to just talk a little bit about what your role was as the investigator for the British Ministry of Defense's UFO reports when they would come in? From what I understand, you would be the one who would look at the reports and decide if it could be a threat or not, and I guess present your reports to the ministry.
That's right. My job was it was twofold, essentially. Firstly, and arguably even more importantly than the investigations, was handling policy on the subject. In other words, advising defense ministers how to handle the phenomenon, what our line should be. Now, that is obviously kind of something that's decided by the nature of the phenomenon itself, and that, as we always used to say, was events-led, which leads me, as you were asking about, to the bread and butter of this particular job, which was investigating the 200 or 300 reports that we received each year, and yes, deciding whether there was evidence of any potential threat to the defense of the UK, or anything of more general defense interest. And those terms were deliberately kept fairly vague. We didn't tend to define them, which meant we could pretty much do what we liked.
Now, were you interested in UFOs before you started doing that job with the Ministry of Defense? I know you were a civilian working for them, or was this something that you have become very passionate about since your job with the ministry?
I had no interest in this subject whatsoever. To me, this was just another government job. You get moved around every few years, and I was fortunate enough to be looking for a sideways move at the exact time that the job on the UFO desk came up. So it was just right place, right time, and I did that job for the next 3 years. But no interest in the subject, no belief. I just went in with hopefully an open mind and thought, well, I'm going to do my best to do this job for 3 years and hopefully get a promotion at the end of it, which I did. But yeah, afterwards, absolutely, I felt that this subject was just too fascinating to walk away from. So I stayed in the Ministry of Defense for many years after that. I didn't leave till 2006, but I kept up my interest. And particularly when the British government started declassifying and releasing many of the old case files that I'd worked on. I mean, literally, I think somewhere around about 60,000 pages of documents that have now been declassified, many of which I wrote. When that happened, of course, I was, even though my Secrecy Act binds me for life, I was much more able to speak about this. And yes, there are few questions bigger and more profound than, are we alone or not in the universe? Are we being visited? And yeah, I just simply couldn't walk away from a subject that impactful.
Another country that has declassified some documents related to UFOs is Russia. And I recently watched a YouTube video that you are part of related to a Russian nuclear sub incident where they witnessed a group of UFOs, I guess, that were underwater, because it seems like a lot of these vehicles are trans-medium. They can operate underwater just like they can in the air. And these vehicles were coming towards this sub before shooting out of the water into the air. And there's also another story in that same video from 1982 related to some Russian divers in Siberia, where there was actually allegedly an interaction with some beings underwater that and these beings actually caused some harm to some of the divers when they tried to capture one of the beings. Allegedly, something went off and these divers were forced to resurface too fast, and it caused them physical harm with about 3 of them passing away. So could you talk about those 2 Russian incidents that seem fairly credible?
Well, as you say, these are cases that I've spoken about before, and the latter of the 2 you mentioned, I think, is Lake Baikal in Siberia, which is actually a place that's at the center of quite a lot of mysterious phenomena over the years. But I think this gets to the heart of the reason that governments look at UFOs, and it's the question of whether or not there's a threat. And clearly, any case where it's alleged that there's interaction between the phenomenon, whatever its true nature, and us, then that's cause for potential concern. Now, the question then arises, if there is interaction followed by harm, was it deliberate? Or was it simply a byproduct of the situation? Assuming this incident took place as reported, and I'll come on to that in a minute, but again, was this a deliberate hostile act? Or did, for example, the divers panic, surface too quickly, and then get the bend? So one has to be very careful about assigning intent to this when we don't understand what this actually is. And added to that is the additional problem that with all these sorts of reports that come out of, for example, Russia, China as well, we're dealing with countries that, rightly or wrongly, are categorized at the moment as adversaries. And because of that, because of the fact that these are not free, open, democratic societies with a free press, and because of the language difficulties, all those things go into the melting pot. And what you're left with is real confusion in actually being certain about what happened. So we've got these stories coming out of places like Russia, but we don't necessarily know the full story.
Now, some people will dismiss UFO sightings by saying they're Russian or they're Chinese or from another country, which isn't really that much more settling that there could be enemy aircraft in our airspace. But do you think incidents like this that have been documented by the military from countries like Russia kind of give an idea that this is happening all over the world, not just the United States? So chances that this is another country's military that has just much more advanced craft than we have access to, does this show that that's less of a possibility?
Yes, I mean, it's a very interesting point because the whole situation reminds me of what happened during the Second World War with the so-called Foo Fighters. These were small balls of light and metallic discs that followed aircraft on bombing raids. And of course, at first, British and American pilots reported these things and thought that it was some sort of Nazi secret weapon. Well, after the war, it transpired that the Germans and the Japanese had been having these too. So as you say, it is absolutely a global phenomenon. And of course, this also is exactly the debate that we're having right now with these sightings involving the US Navy. The Tic Tac incident, the other ones, we've seen the 3 videos, of course. And the question arises, is this Russia? Is it China? Or is it something else? And it was interesting because Senator Marco Rubio, who's the acting chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, gave a very interesting interview about this. And he said, look, I'd almost rather this was extraterrestrial, because given the speeds and maneuvers that are being reported for these things, we're in big trouble if this is Russia and China. Well, when you've got the acting chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee saying, I hope this is aliens, then it just shows you what a changed landscape we're in, given that, I'm sure you can remember, 3-4 years ago, the official position of the US government was that nobody's interested in this subject or investigating at all. Well, now we know differently.
Yes, the U.S. Navy back in December 2017 officially released those 3 video clips of those U.S. Navy unidentified aerial phenomenon encounters, which I think is a term you may have coined. But why do you think the Pentagon last year came out and basically also said those 3 clips were real? And speaking of those clips, it's also out there that those are just clips of longer videos, and those are not the only videos out there in the Department of Defense's possession. Those are just what they've released to the public. But why do you think only in the past few years now are the documents and the videos and so forth being declassified?
Well, I think a large part of the credit for this must go to the former intelligence officer, Luis Elizondo, who's certainly been at the forefront of efforts to bring this out into the open and kickstart what I think he's referred to as a conversation with the American people about this phenomenon. And I'm glad to say that that conversation is now going on at the highest levels. The president has certainly confirmed that he's attended a meeting on this. Various other senators, both on the Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee, have confirmed that they've been briefed. And yeah, this story came out in December 2017 when the New York Times put it on the front page and said, yeah, we've, amongst other things, we know that there was this program called ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. 3 videos, as you say. Nobody is pretending that there's just 3 videos or 3 incidents. The US Navy themselves said this is part of a series of ongoing incursions into restricted military airspace. What was interesting to me, and this is the thing that I think a lot of people have missed, is that after the New York Times ran that story, there was really no need for the Department of Defense to say much more than, yeah, we'll give you a brief comment on this. But last year, they formally posted these 3 videos on their own website and issued a press release where they said the previous releases were unauthorized. But now we are putting them out for everyone to see. And yes, they are genuine US Navy videos. And yes, the phenomenon characterized in these videos remains unexplained. And the reason that's interesting is because it's almost as if every time this story is in danger of dying down, the Department of Defense itself throws gasoline on the fire and the whole thing flares up again. So that is interesting.
I think it was Tom DeLonge and his To the Stars Academy that helped get those videos out to the public long before the Department of Defense and the U.S. Navy released them. I've heard recently that Luis Elizondo has left To the Stars Academy along with some other members of To the Stars Academy, such as Chris Mellon and Steve Justice. Do you know if that's true?
Yes, my understanding is that that's correct. I think Tom DeLonge did a fantastic job of gathering around him a group of very impressive former government, military, intelligence community officials who then helped get all this out to the public and certainly have been playing a part in some of the congressional briefings that have been going on this. But I think, as you say, those 3 people, Elizondo, Justice, and Mellon, have now parted company with Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy. I think the split was amicable. I think it simply, I believe that Lou Elizondo said, well, TTSA has pretty much achieved its original mission, and certainly they're now pursuing a number of entertainment projects, books and movies and things. And as Lou has said, he's not really an entertainer. He's a former intelligence officer. So I think it's really a question of people going their separate ways to play to their particular strengths. Tom DeLonge taking things forward within TTSA on the entertainment front. Lou Steve and Chris probably working behind the scenes with some of these congressional committees, maybe briefing some of the people in the incoming Biden administration, which is going to be something to watch, what position, if any, they're going to take on all this. As I say, seems to be amicable. It's interesting, but we'll see what happens next.
Yes, you mentioned what position the Biden administration is going to take. And last week, the big news was part of a $2.3 trillion COVID relief and government funding bill that came out and was signed by President Trump. There was something in that bill requesting more disclosure of what's going on with UFOs to other government departments within 180 days. So basically by the end of June. Some civilians are taking this news as if this is the president and Marco Rubio demanding that disclosure happen to the public. But from what I understand from a video you did with the New York Post, this does not mean disclosure is going to happen to the public. There's just going to be more information shared with other branches of the government. Is that correct?
That is correct. Last June, the Senate Intelligence Committee inserted some wording into the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021. And under the heading of advanced aerial threats, essentially they put in some material about UFOs and said, look, we want to know who is doing what across the US government, and we want some sort of coherent strategy across government on this. Tying together what the US Navy are doing, and the US Navy have had a unit called the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force looking at this, but also trying to tie that together with some investigations that the FBI have been doing. And the Intelligence Committee simply said, well, look, we want a report on this from Director of National Intelligence, consulting the Secretary of Defense and others as necessary. And what happened recently, what happened last week, was that the Intelligence Authorization Act was swept up into the COVID-19 relief bill. So when that got enacted, the clock started ticking. But the DoD has known for months that this requirement's coming. So I wouldn't be surprised if they started work on it already. But what it means is that now, as I say, the clock's ticking, and within 180 days of the December 27th signature of this act, DNI must produce this report. As you say, the UFO community is getting very excited, like, oh, this is disclosure. Sadly, it's not. It's not disclosure. It's just a report on the phenomenon, and the report must be unclassified, but it can have a classified annex to it. So, of course, it's quite possible, in fact, it's extremely probable, that the unclassified note that maybe will get to the media and the public will be extremely bland, and all the really interesting stuff will probably be in a classified annex. So yes, this is a very important development, but it's not disclosure, and people really shouldn't get their hopes up, because it's not as if any of the secret and top secret information we know exists on this is going to be made public. It isn't.
There was another piece of news last week that Avi Loeb, who was the chair of Harvard's Department of Astronomy, I believe he still is, believes a piece of alien technology about 100 yards long floated through our solar system in September 2017. This space object was previously thought to be either an asteroid or a piece of space junk or something else, and it was dubbed Oumuamua, something along those lines. But this is a fairly credible person. Obviously, Harvard University has a great reputation, and the chair of their Department of Astronomy saying that he believes this is a piece of alien technology. that's something that we wouldn't have had a couple of years ago, as you mentioned, but it's becoming more accepted to say stuff like this in public.
It is, absolutely, and you're quite right. A couple of years ago, this story would have been laughed out of court, and people would have said that the professor had taken leave of his senses. But now I think what he's doing is simply articulating what a number of people in the scientific community now think, that it's only a matter of time before we detect, I guess you'd call it, the fingerprints of extraterrestrial civilizations, whether it's spaceships passing through the solar system, probes, a radio signal from another civilization, whatever it is. But I think the consensus has now swung around to the fact that the universe is going to be teeming with life, and that it's only a matter of time before we find it, or it finds us. And as you say, the controversy over Oumuamua is fascinating. But what I think he said last week, the professor, was that this won't be the only one, and that we should be watching out for more of these things. You know, when we send probes out, it's not like we've just sent one. We've sent dozens, if not hundreds, and we keep doing it, and they keep getting better and faster and smarter. And it's likely that if others in the universe are doing the same thing, they will be doing the same as us, not just sending one, sending multiple probes. So this is a wake-up call, I think, to people. There are potentially things out there that will fundamentally change our perception of who we are and what our place is in the cosmos.
I've heard Stephen Hawkins say that he was against us sending signals out into space to possibly have other intelligent life forms find them and contact us due to the dangers. What if someone gets these signals and decides Earth is a really nice planet? Why don't we come and take it over? What are your thoughts on what Stephen Hawkins said regarding us sending those signals out?
Well, yes, absolutely. His warning was that first contact between us and extraterrestrial civilizations might be like the European explorers encountering the Native Americans. And as Hawking concluded, that didn't end too well for the Native Americans. But I think that the problem with all this is that there's nothing we can do about it. The genie is out of the bottle. We have been a detectable civilization for decades because of our radio and television broadcasts and certain radar emissions, and there's nothing we can do about that. Like I say, it's a done deal. Any civilization capable of threatening us is already aware of us. So yes, I understand the warning that Stephen Hawking gave, but as I say, it's too late to worry about that now. We're just going to have to hope that if we are visited, that if other civilizations out there have cracked the secret of viable interstellar travel, that they will come as scientists and anthropologists and explorers, not as conquerors, invaders or exterminators.
And they all might not have the same intentions. I mean, you look at the world that we live in, every country does not have the same intentions, and we've seen all these different types of craft. They could either be from different planets or different civilizations, or they could be the same craft or from the same world, just different craft coming from the same planet, just like us. China might have a different space shuttle going up and visiting other planets than us. So everyone could have different intentions. That's, I guess, why we have people like you and Luis Elizondo that worked in the government trying to get data on these things to find out exactly what their intentions are, because they are in our airspace without letting us know what their intentions are, which is what the threat is. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And it I think, surprises people to learn that there's actually an equation that defines threat, and it's defined as a product of capability and intent. Well, we know the capability because we've got some fairly good data from the pilots, the radar operators. We've got radar data. We have MASINT data, measurement and signature analysis. We doubtless have some satellite data too, but I very much doubt that that's an area that can be discussed too much at unclassified level. But look, the data that we do have on capability is quite disturbing, and again that harks back to what Marco Rubio said about all this: speeds, maneuvers, accelerations, which are quite extraordinary. And as he put it, I hope to goodness that it isn't the Russians or the Chinese, because we're in big trouble if an adversary has developed this. So assuming for a moment, it's a pretty big assumption, but let's assume that it is extraterrestrial. The capability is obviously immense. Self-evidently, any civilization that's mastered interstellar travel has technology order of magnitude above and beyond anything that we've got. But yeah, intent, we don't know. We can only come at this from an anthropological, from an anthropocentric viewpoint, and that may be completely wrong. All our sort of human assumptions about, oh well, aliens would do this or aliens wouldn't do that, they wouldn't come all the way here and then do this. How do we know? We don't. So to a certain extent, it's back to the Stephen Hawking thing. All we can really do is hope. But yeah, capability times intent equals threat. And again, in the military, in the government, in the intelligence community, the default position is it's better to assume there's a threat and be relieved if one doesn't materialize than assume something will be benign and then get caught out if it turns out to be hostile.
There's a fellow Brit fan on here named Rebecca Gold watching from the UK and is asking what you think of Stephen Greer. He likes to put out the information to the public that he allegedly speaks to extraterrestrials and they all come in peace and we shouldn't be worried about them. There's absolutely no threat, and basically buy his movies, buy his books, buy his app. We can all just trust him, and the military's trying to create a fake UFO invasion, false flag operation.
Well, I've met Stephen Greer several times, and he certainly has his ideas and theories about all this. His ideas and theories do not match my ideas and theories. I think it's safe to say. I mean, my response to any of that would be, well, fine, but how do we know? And trying to boil it down even to a cliche for a moment, but let's supposing that's all genuine and an extraterrestrial said we come in peace. Well, how can you possibly evaluate that statement? How can we evaluate the statements of various nations around the world when they say we have no hostile intentions towards this particular country, and then 2 weeks later they come over the border? I think our history teaches us that we should judge people and nations by what they do and not necessarily by what they say. So again, with all of this, my response is fine, but how could you possibly evaluate any of that, whether it's coming from Stephen Greer or whether it's coming from extraterrestrials? How could you possibly know? And how could you evaluate whether it was legitimate or not? As I say, I rather judge all this, the phenomenon, on the data that we have, and frankly, the data is patchy and inconclusive. I don't think we really have enough data to really put together a coherent picture of what's going on with any of this. And I think those of us who've looked at this from within government aren't afraid to say from time to time we don't know. And it always astounds me that people in the UFO community, whether they're believers or skeptics, sometimes have this absolute certainty about the phenomenon that those of us in government just simply don't have because the data aren't there.
And there has been some cases of radiation, I guess, being emitted off of UFOs and causing harm to humans through that, and also some military encounters with UFOs that haven't turned out well for I guess, the known military entity, from what I understand. What has your research shown on that?
Yes, there certainly have been some cases where pilots, for example, have been ordered to intercept UFOs, and there have been a couple of occasions where pilots have been ordered to open fire and have either shot at or attempted to launch air-to-air missiles at UFOs. Probably not a good idea. Again, not an area that I can discuss in any great detail because all rules of engagement are fairly highly classified, and rightly so, whether you're talking about Russians or Martians. But I think, again, as I mentioned earlier with the Russian incidents that we were discussing, the question really with this and with the radiation that you mentioned is, was this a deliberate attempt to cause harm, or was it simply a byproduct of someone getting too close? We've just passed the 40th anniversary of the Rendlesham Forest incident, Britain's best known UFO case. And it's certainly claimed there that some of the witnesses had health issues attributable, they believe, to getting too close to a UFO. And indeed, there is a declassified Ministry of Defense intelligence assessment of the phenomenon, which was codenamed Project Condign, in which some of my colleagues basically did an intelligence assessment of the phenomenon. And they put into the final report a phrase along the lines of, it might be postulated that the Rendlesham Forest incident was an occasion where witnesses got closer than usual and were exposed for longer periods of time than usual to UAP radiation. Now, when that final report got declassified, I was able to point out that sentence to a lawyer who was doing some pro bono work for some of the Rendlesham witnesses, and that report then got sent to the Department for Veterans Affairs, and I believe that one or more settlements were made on the basis of that. So you do get these cases in government where there's acknowledgement that the phenomenon is real and acknowledgement of this UAP radiation. And yes, by the way, you mentioned earlier this term UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. We didn't invent it, but in the 90s at the Ministry of Defense, we certainly popularized it, not with the media and public, but internally. We used it in our own policy discussions, and we used it to reframe the debate about the phenomenon and to try to get rid of the pop culture baggage that came with the term UFO. So we simply dropped UFO and replaced it with UAP. And it's interesting that in some of these recent US government statements, they've actually acknowledged our work on that and said, yes, we've borrowed this term from the British government.
There was also a case in Falcon Lake, Manitoba, here in Canada, where someone was actually treated for burns after encountering a UFO, which I'm sure you've heard about, as that's probably Canada's best known sighting.
Yes. Now, was that Stefan Michalak, if I'm remembering, 67 or thereabouts?
Yes.
But, fascinating. I've seen the photo. I'm sure everyone in the UFO community has. If they haven't, they should check it out. It's pretty interesting. I mean, obviously, back when that happened, I suppose the medical techniques available for looking at cell tissue damage and other changes at the cellular level was probably less than the technology that we have today. But an absolutely fascinating case, and one that if it was to occur today, I think we would have many more things in our arsenal medically to try to determine. And but it's a very interesting point, because one of the when the New York Times published this story about the Pentagon's ATIP program, one of the interesting things that happened in the few weeks afterwards was that the Defense Intelligence Agency wrote to Congress about this and said, look, under the ATIP program, we conducted 38 scientific and technical studies into this. Now, a lot of this was about deep space travel, clearly trying to understand the theoretical physics behind interstellar travel. But one of the papers was about human interface and human effects. And that's a very understudied aspect of all of this. And it's probably the most legally and ethically challenging aspect of everything that's been going on in the US military and in the intelligence community. But yes, there's no getting away from the fact that some people who claim to have had close encounters with the phenomenon have interacted, certainly in recent years, with some people involved in some of these US government programs. And I know, for example, that blood and DNA samples have been taken. And as I say, the whole question of interaction between the phenomenon and us is I think, going to be at the cutting edge of all of this. And as I say, if there's any harm done, the $64,000 question is it deliberate or is it simply a byproduct? And I don't know.
There's also the documentation, which is a little frightening, about the interaction with nuclear silos and these UFO phenomena. Could you tell us what your thoughts are on some of these interactions and maybe some of the most credible cases you're aware of regarding military officers that have gone on the record regarding this?
Yes, I think any question about nuclear issues is a question where I can say very little, but there are a number of researchers out there, Robert Hastings being the one who first comes to mind, who've done a great job of documenting cases where there's been alleged interaction between the phenomenon and nuclear facilities. And I mean, I can, speaking for myself, I can't even confirm or deny the presence of nuclear weapons at any location at any particular time. I mean, it's still that sensitive. But I one time I presented a TV show on this simply because I couldn't be interviewed on it. So I said, let's do it the other way around. And I asked the questions. So I interviewed a number of people. I interviewed some of the Bentwaters Woodbridge personnel about the Rendlesham Forest incident, where, of course, it's alleged that there's a nuclear aspect to this encounter. I interviewed a former Air Force officer called Robert Salas, who was present at a very interesting case where it's alleged there was interference with nuclear weapons at Maelstrom Air Force Base. I think there's also been an incident at Minot. There was a fascinating case from Ukraine in, gosh, I can't remember offhand whether it was 80 or 82. See, in a lot of these incidents, it's alleged that nuclear weapons are somehow switched off, maybe as some sort of test, maybe as a demonstration of power, that even our most potent weapons can be rendered totally ineffective. I don't know if it happens. I don't know why it happens, but that's what people have alleged. But in this Ukrainian case, it was even more disturbing because the missiles weren't switched off. Quite the opposite. They were put into a pre-launch sequence. And I mean, the people at the silo literally thought, well, this is it. You know, the missiles are going to be launched for some reason, and this is going to precipitate World War III. Of course, as we know, history tells us that didn't happen, but a number of people said that it came very close and that that there was a UFO connection to this. So yeah, I can't talk about those sorts of cases much, but there's a lot of material out there in the community that civilian researchers have put out there, often with some military officers speaking on the record, and those military officers that want to do that, well, that's their choice to do so.
Yes, and of course you can't talk about that because of your old job, and you don't want to be prosecuted or anything with whatever you signed as far as what you have to keep classified with what you worked with there. But the big news since the last time I talked to you off the record was Israel's defense former minister of the space directorate, Haim Eshed, alleged that there is a galactic federation of aliens out there that has agreements with the U.S. government. Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian Minister of Defense, also spoke about this in 2017 in an interview with me that really didn't get much publicity at the time, but people are talking about it now. It seems like a unique claim. I know you were quoted by, I believe, NBC related to this claim that received worldwide coverage, as this general is a very credible person. However, this claim is quite a large claim, to say the least. So I'm wondering if you could tell us your thoughts on this alleged galactic federation of aliens.
Well, Haim Eshed is who he says he is, and he did what he said he did. I guess my big question is he speaking about matters on which he has direct personal knowledge and experience from within government and from within the Israeli space program? Or is he simply citing his beliefs based on reading the literature or based on things that he's been told by a third party? And of course, it's interesting, you mentioned Paul Hellyer. It's the same question. Now, Paul Hellyer is I think, pretty clear on this. He said that when he was Defense Minister of Canada, and indeed, I believe, Deputy Prime Minister at a time, this did not cross his desk, and it's only subsequently that he's talked to some of his military colleagues, some of whom are in the US, who've confirmed the reality of this to him. And my question is, with Haim Eshed, again, it's the same question. Well, is this what you know or what you think? And we don't know the answer yet when it comes to Haim Eshed. But look, all of this, none of this can be looked at in isolation. It's all part of a big jigsaw puzzle that we're slowly piecing together. If any of these things happened in isolation, you'd probably think, well, the person's gone crazy. We were talking earlier about Professor R.V. Loeb at Harvard and his claims about Oumuamua. But don't look at that in isolation. Look at that along with Paul Hellyer's claims. Look at it along with Haim Eshed's claims. I mean, Galactic Federation sounds like something straight out of Star Trek, but yet, you know, maybe it's real. And what happened a few days afterwards? None other than a former CIA director, John Brennan, gave an interview, and he started off talking about weather phenomenon, and I thought, oh my goodness, he's going to play this very safe. He'd been asked about the U.S. Navy videos, and then suddenly he starts talking about, well, you know, some people think it might be attributable to something which is a different form of life, and so when these sorts of people, whether it's a former CIA director, whether it's a professor at Harvard, whether it's a Canadian defense minister, whether it's the co-founder of Israel's space program, when those sorts of people at that sort of level, with those sorts of backgrounds, start saying this, I think the world should be sitting up and paying more attention. And the good news is that I think they are. I think the landscape has changed over the last 3 years, and it's continuing to change. And all of these people, whether it's Haim Eshed, John Brennan, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, Avi Loeb, Paul Hellyer, all of these people are playing a part in changing the world. And it will change if, as I often like to say, the believers don't have to prove a whole bunch of these cases. They only need to prove one of them. The skeptics need to be right every single day. The believers only need to be right once. And if they are, we're going to have to rethink and redo everything. Politics, science, religion, technology, economics, the military, philosophies, everything will be altered by the knowledge that we're not alone in the universe. And it seems to me every time one of these stories breaks, we're getting closer and closer, maybe, to that moment.
Another very credible person from the UK that came out about this before his death that I know you knew personally was the five-star admiral of the fleet, Lord Peter Hill Norton, who served in World War II. He was also the chairman of the NATO Military Committee. He was a big supporter of disclosure, and he was quoted as saying, quote, "Objects in our atmosphere that are technically miles advance of anything we can deploy, that we have no means of stopping them coming here, and that we have no defense against them, should be hostile," end quote. So he talked about these objects. He was obviously the NATO on the NATO Military Committee, five-star admiral. He was privy to a lot of inside information, and he felt there was not enough research being done into these things. And he also believed that the US and UK governments knew more than they were letting on. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about him, because he's extremely credible, obviously.
He absolutely is. And I think with this subject, he's somebody who was maybe just sadly a little ahead of his time on this. At the time, his claims were maybe not taken as seriously as they should have been, but here was, and again, sometimes the problem is how this story plays out in the United States. And because everyone uses military titles, he was known as CDS, former Chief of the Defense Staff, but this was Britain's most senior military officer. If people had pointed out, well, this would be like the equivalent of a retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States coming out and saying this. Imagine somebody like Colin Powell suddenly turning around and saying, we're being visited by extraterrestrials and the government knows all about it and is covering it up. And yet that's precisely the situation with Lord Hill Norton. I mean, he was ahead of his time, I think. And if he was still alive now, while this ongoing story is playing out about the US Navy sightings, classified briefings in Congress, I think he would be absolutely at the heart of this debate. But as I say, he was just a little too soon with it. Perhaps the world wasn't quite ready at the time.
Another big news story that was reported everywhere in late December was a leaked photo that was taken by an F-18 fighter pilot off the east coast of the US by his cell phone of an unidentified aerial phenomenon. And supposedly there's a second photo that hasn't been released yet that is more clear. Although it did get a lot of worldwide attention, I noticed many of the news reports played the X-Files music and they made fun of it. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this picture that came out, and your thoughts on the media still taking this as a bit of a joke, even though I would say it's fairly credible stuff.
Yes, there's no stopping the media. If they want to play the X-Files music, I think they will. And that's, fortunately, the discussions that go on after the X-Files music are becoming more and more serious. And more we're finding that retired military officers scientists, intelligence community personnel, they're being the ones invited on the TV shows these days, which is very good news. Ironically, the photo's not that impressive, frankly, and some people have said it might even just be a balloon. And I think the problem is that when you put these photos out, nobody in the media and in the civilian UFO research community has the resources and capabilities that say the government has when it comes to imagery analysis. So that's one problem. The other problem, frankly, is that this story was run by a new media outlet called The Debrief. And they ran a great story the day before. And the story was that some serving intelligence community personnel were speaking about this unidentified aerial phenomena task force that is operating within Office of Naval Intelligence. And the Debrief had published effectively a sort of, I don't want to say leaks, but information from well-placed sources saying, look, the interim assessments of the task force is that they haven't ruled out the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And that was extraordinary big news. And then the very next day, they ran the story about this photo, and it to my mind, it wasn't as big a story as the story the day before, and it had the effect of almost killing the first story and sending people down the rabbit hole of is this a balloon or is it something else? And I think this sort of thing happens in the intelligence community a lot, and when somebody does something like that, it's like the magician saying, look at my hand, waving the wand around and things, and the answer to the question, why is he doing that, is because he's trying to distract you from something else. So I would look at the story that ran the day before that photo got leaked much more than I would look at the photo itself.
Now, that pilot would have been a trained observer, obviously, and would know the difference between a balloon and an unidentified aerial phenomenon, I would imagine. But do you think this second picture is going to come out in 2021? And there's also some fans on here asking if you think we'll see more U.S. government UFO videos and other evidence be officially released in this year.
Yes, I am predicting more releases. I think some of them may well come from the Department of Defense itself. Some may come from this initiative, as I say, that the Director of National Intelligence has to submit this report to the Senate Intelligence Committee by late June, but don't be surprised if it comes out before that. So we may see some of that, though, as I cautioned, don't get your hopes up. And we may see some of this material coming out from people like Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, and some of the journalistic contacts that they have, some of these media outlets, and some of the individual journalists who are fairly close to some of those people. So it may be in the Debrief, it may be George Knapp, the Las Vegas-based journalist, has a role in some of this. It may be some other so-called young guns who are taking up the mantle of a lot of this. But yes, 100%, I am sure that we will see more releases this year. I'm pretty hopeful we'll see that triangle picture. It might not be as spectacular as people think, but I'm pretty sure we'll see it. I'm sure we'll see some more videos. I'm certain we'll see some more documents about the ATIP program. As I say, the only real question is how much of this is going to come from within government itself, and how much is going to come from former government people and some of the media outlets close to them.
I put up a video on New Year's Day where I discussed I believe it was recorded on December 30th, UFO hovering over the waters of Hawaii that apparently went into the water. That surprisingly has over 200,000 hits on this channel, just me reporting on it. But there seems to be a direct correlation between UFOs and water. Obviously, they can operate underwater, most of them, from what we've seen. I'm wondering what your theory is on what could be underwater. Is it bases? Is it refueling? What are some of the top, most credible theories that you've heard related to this relationship?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier in the interview about the dangers of taking an anthropocentric view. I mean, there are all sorts of theories. One theory is that they have bases on this planet underwater. Another theory is, as you say, that they're taking up water either for personal sustenance or perhaps to refuel some sort of propulsion system that uses either water or splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen. But the truthful answer is that we simply don't know. But yeah, there's been absolutely many cases where UFOs have been seen coming into and going out of the water. Lou Elizondo has talked about what he calls transmedium travel, this ability to seamlessly operate both in and out of water. As he's talked about that as being one of the so-called 5 observables of the phenomenon, which are extremely interesting to him and some of his colleagues who've worked on ATIP and related programs. So what it all means, I don't know, but it's interesting and it's certainly one to watch. So this Hawaii video is interesting. I don't know whether this is a genuine phenomenon or something mundane, but again, none of this can be looked at in isolation. And there's a great video from Puerto Rico a few years ago of a UFO coming into and coming out of the water, as I say, seemingly without the speed and maneuvers being adversely affected. So that is absolutely one to watch.
What do you say to the people that say this is just black military operations and we really have all this crazy technology, even though we're still flying around in airplanes which haven't really appeared to gain that much more technology over the past 70 years or so, but we have all this secret technology with transmedium travel and phenomenal speeds and all this stuff, and it's really just black military operations.
Yes, all of that is up for discussion, and clearly when we look at whether we're looking at the US Navy videos or whether we're looking at some of the best videos that get posted on the internet, the question is always, is it our own technology, perhaps sometimes being blind tested against the military to see how good our radar is? Can we pick it up at all? If we can, will we scramble jets? If we do, will we successfully intercept it or not? So yeah, all the time the question is, could it be our own black projects? Could it be Russia, China? Or could it be something else? And we still don't know. As I say, it comes back to this irony that those of us who've looked at this from within government genuinely don't have all the answers to this. I know a lot of people like to think we do, but we don't. I don't think we have one of these things hidden away in a hangar somewhere. If we did, we wouldn't be working so darned hard to chase them and find out what the heck we're dealing with.
And the last phenomena I'll ask you about today, since we're just about out of time, is cattle mutilations connection with UFOs. I know there was a spree in Oregon a year or two ago that were heavily investigated by local authorities, and they actually didn't come to any conclusions, but they didn't rule out that it could have been something extraterrestrial by the way that the blood was sucked out of these things, and there was no traces of vehicles or human evidence related to these mutilations, as they occurred in very remote places. But I was just wondering your thoughts on if there could be a connection there, because I'm sure you studied them in your work with the military and since then, of course.
Well, I can't discuss this yet because it hasn't been broadcast, but a little later this year, people will see this. I actually got a chance to visit a ranch where some of these mutilations have taken place, and I must tell you, it is quite extraordinary being confronted by one of these carcasses, and as you say, completely exsanguinated, no sign of any. I mean, look, ranchers know what a predator attack looks like, and they know what death through disease looks like, and this looks like something completely different. It is a genuine mystery, and if there is a connection with the UFO phenomenon, then I find this extremely disturbing, because the whole phenomenon is extremely disturbing.
And it seems like in some of these cases, some of these animals have actually died from the pain of whatever operations were done on them, and there's been incisions made on them that don't look like animals by any stretch, and sometimes they're flipped upside down. So very interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the more disturbing aspects of this mystery. I mean, this phenomenon, it's fascinating, it's intriguing, but it does have a dark side. There's no getting away from that.
Now, I know you're on Facebook and Twitter. Could you let the viewers know where they could follow you? Because you share a lot of interesting stuff. I've been aware of you for about the past 6 months, and it's been fascinating watching a lot of the information that you share.
My website is nickpope.net, and that has links to both Facebook and Twitter accounts. My Twitter is at Nick Pope MOD for Ministry of Defense, so at Nick Pope MOD, and I tend to put most of the breaking news stories on Twitter. So check that out, and as I say, nickpope.net links to that.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm very glad that the feed worked out this time, because for anyone that doesn't know, you live out in the Arizona desert, I guess you could say, very isolated. So I'm happy it worked out. And I'll leave it up to you with whatever closing message you want to give to the viewers here.
Well, thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for listening to this and watching too. I mean, my role in this subject isn't to tell anyone what to think. And I know full well that many people watching will have very different views than my own. I mean, I think we all come at this from different backgrounds and different perspectives, and that's as it should be. I mean, it would be a very boring and disturbing world if we all thought the same. So please, feel free to disagree with me on a whole range of things that I've said. And I know that some people do think that I'm still secretly working for the government on all this. I promise you I'm not, but all I would say is this: whatever you believe, fascinating things are going on right now. So follow this story. We've had many interesting developments. As I say, the US Navy UFO videos, congressional briefings, the president making some fairly teasing, cryptic remarks on all this. But believe me when I tell you this, I will tell you this, there are many more twists and turns to come in this story. So watch carefully. I can't promise disclosure. I think that presupposes that there's one single tangible truth to disclose, and I'm not sure there is. I think it's more complex and nuanced, but watch closely. 2021 is going to be one heck of a year, so buckle up. It's going to be one heck of a ride.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed.